But let's kick this off and get right into the meat of it. We'll get about 20 minutes or so. We got about maybe, 4 or 5 questions, depending on how the conversation goes. We went through all of the questions that everyone has asked ahead of time, looking through where a lot of them were asking. And so the one that came up first, but really bubbled up, was just like, how do you quantify PMM influence and impact? Huge question. That one we could probably spend the rest of this on. But maybe you can kick us off. Jeff, you are off mute. Always my favorite to pick on the people that are off mute. And so I'm going to kick it over to you, thinking about quantifying our influence and our impact.
Punishing me for doing the right thing, I see. Happy to start. I mean, the caveat I'll start with is it's going to depend on the type of business you're in, product-led, sales-led. But at the end of the day, companies want to drive revenue. And so when I think about driving product marketing impact, improving it, I try to get as close to that as possible. Of course, sometimes it's not realistic and sometimes it is. So I'll give you a real example of some things that my team tracks today. We have a lot of like uniquely sellable SKUs where there's PMMs that are in charge of launching and basically building the messaging and the story for those. And we know how much revenue comes from each of those. And so I ask all the PMMs to drive towards goals. Of course, it's a shared goal with product management and with sales. But if you really believe, which I do, that the PMM is the quarterback of the product and its success and go to market, you should be looking at that. And then, of course, the leading indicators of revenue are things like pipeline and meetings booked and all of that. I'm happy to go into others, JD, or if you want to kick it to other panelists, your call here.
Yeah, let's see what the other panelists think. Pallavi, anything you want to add there, or anything of how you think about quantifying?
Yeah, absolutely. I like 2 things, Jeff, that you said. One is it depends, right? It's subjective in the stage. The second is, like you, I think of PMMs as mini CEOs of their area, whether it's a product, vertical domain, or whatever it is, solution, whatever you're handling, your mini CEOs. And so as a CEO, you should be thinking about business first. So align with Jeff's thinking in terms of thinking about revenue. Generally, revenue comes in a little later. So the leading indicator for me also is pipeline, because you can track the things. And the things that you can do in pipeline are obviously launches, but also sales plays, how you're enabling the sales teams there, and the marketing campaigns that are driving the pipelines, the events you're speaking at. So all of those tactics collectively drive the pipeline. So as long as you're measuring and tracking where PMM is contributing to that, then you've got a good gauge of those metrics. I will caveat that generally PMM does not have their own dashboard. We're always feeding into somebody else's dashboard, right? So there is a sales dashboard, there is marketing dashboard, there is product dashboard, and we're sort of feeding into that. And so it's really important to understand what are the areas in which, or what are picking the areas where you can say without doubt, we contributed to this in a significant way. As long as you pick those for each of those, your internal, dashboards, then you're in a good spot. I'll pass it to Leah from here.
Wonderful. Thank you. Yeah, a big plus one to what both of you have said. You all have touched on a little bit of, I think, like more the sales-led motion. So I'll switch gears and talk a little bit more about some of the product-led stuff. So I think one of the things that we look at is also alignment and influence. And so we think about the feedback that customers are giving us, and we think about how to work with, well, this speaks to the next event that we'll be having, right? Around how to influence the product roadmap. And so we oftentimes think about, okay, when we're advocating for features on behalf of customers, how often are we successful in those advocacy efforts, and how often are we seeing those land on the product roadmap? And I think that speaks to, the influence that product marketing is having in the organization and the way that we're showing up to create value on behalf of customers. The other thing is we'll oftentimes we have an attribution model that looks at a lot of our go-to-market motions, and then we've aligned, but to to, I think the opening that Alex gave, if anyone has like nailed KPIs and feels 100% confident in how to measure the impact of product marketing, man, I want to talk to you, because this is like one of those things that changes on a day-to-day basis. And so it's constantly evolving for us, and we're building out this attribution model. And it's quite incredible, because we're looking at all the different ways that we can create value on behalf of customers and on behalf of the company, whether that is looking at the way that emails are influencing purchase decisions, the way that in-product moments are influencing purchase decisions. And all these things have to be weighted, and we have to talk about, first touch versus last touch versus multi-touch. And so there's a lot to get aligned on, but I would say using an attribution model has been really instructive for us, just to get a really broad sense of the way that different channels are contributing to our ability to create value. Oh, and the last thing, and I think someone started to touch on this, is you want to align on the quantification and the outcomes you're trying to achieve, and align that with the behavior that you're trying to drive, all while keeping in mind the very real costs of tracking and reporting out, because this data is not always easily accessible, and we don't always control our own destinies in terms of the dashboards that we're using to access that data. And so it can create a real burden if you create an overly complex system where you're asking PMMs to self-serve and to pull from 15 different dashboards to try to quantify the impact that they're creating. And there's real trade-off costs there with them doing the work that actually creates the value versus like tracking and trying to report out on it.
Yeah, these are all really good. I love the storytelling from quarterbacks to CEOs. I've always said orchestra, like thinking as the conductor. So I think we're all in the same, kind of area here, trying to figure out how do we talk about and really the impact of being a quarterback or a CEO or a conductor, right? And I think some of the things I'm hearing from you guys is really thinking through, well, what matters to the business? Leveling up to if it's an OKR or if there's, a revenue number, and making sure you're really kind of dialed in and focused on that. One of the things I want to dive into for our second question is something that Leah said. If you have these strong KPIs and you know what they are, and you're always like, these are the things, like, I want to talk to you. So thankfully, I want to talk to you. You guys are the three. Literally, just like last week, as we're in the middle of kind of H1 planning, is our head of demand gen's like, JD's are like, what metrics do you look at and do you like focus on? And I was like, I'm in product marketing. I don't look at any metric, so it's like a joke, right? Like, I don't have metrics. What are you talking about? I'm not demand gen over here with your CTRs and CPCs and conversion rate low, way, way more focus on the metrics over there. But I say that jokingly because a lot of people listening are asking the same question. They're like, hey, what are the 3-5 metrics that you think that we should always report on? And I think we heard a few of them. So maybe going back over to Jeff, we can snake back around. What are some of those metrics that you're, looking at, thinking about as you're, leading out on the marketing side?
Yeah. So I would even challenge this idea that demand gen and product marketing metrics are separate. So I've developed a new perspective on this because I now lead all of marketing after leading product marketing at various places. If you think about it, if you're trying to drive leads and pipeline, who's coming up with the story? If you're running webinars, who decides what the topic is? It's going to be related to the company's messaging points and things that you're trying to say. So point being here is I think that product marketing really should be equally responsible for demand gen metrics in many aspects. What was the other piece of this? Did I miss the rest of your question?
No, I think that's a great answer. The second piece of it, if you wanted to, is just are there specific metrics that you think, and I hate to use this word always. I hate these definitive always answers, black and white answers. But hey, if you're hey, if you're in this type of motion, sales led, enterprise focus, you should at least be looking at these three. And maybe that's a better way to kind of frame it for you.
Yeah. So I mean, the first, which I already hit on, is revenue and pipeline to the extent that it's possible. I've personally been responsible for win rates, or more specifically competitive win rates, if I'm running competitive analysis and owning that competitor, to the point where I was reporting on it in monthly company-wide KPI meetings. So I think that's a good one if your team is responsible for that to do. And then there's just always going to be some level of softer metric of did you launch the thing on time and with quality? Like you just
Yeah.
you just need to have metrics like that. Because to the point made earlier, a lot of these other things are lagging indicators, and there's like a sentiment and a velocity around it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
love that.
I think that's great. And we use kind of a similar framework in terms of like what are the leading indicators and what are the lagging indicators. So I'll jump in, that way we can keep people on their toes and not just snake around in a circle. Okay, so when we look at leading indicators, I mean, these aren't the things that create success, but these are how we know if we're starting to be on track. And so we look at channel performance, we look at content engagement. So we're looking at open rates and click-through rates and time spent on assets. And, is sales utilizing the assets? And this is one of the things that we always also focus on and try to always create shared goals with teams that we want to have alignment with. Because if product marketing has KPIs around how often sales is utilizing that, you want to make damn sure that your sales lead also has KPIs around that, because they need to drive that behavior within their team. It's your responsibility to do really good intake and create assets that sales can use and put them in places that sales is likely to access them and use them. And ultimately, they've got to be accountable to driving that behavior with their team. So I think shared accountability and shared KRs is also a really good recipe for success. For lagging indicators, we're looking at product awareness, trial, and ultimately adoption. Are people aware and then ultimately adopting the solutions that we're suggesting are a really great fit for their business? And similar to what Jeff said, ultimately we want to see how that's impacting the company's financials. We want to see how that's impacting our ARR. One thing I would say is increasingly we're looking at is net dollar retention, and whether our customers that are our current customers are spending more with us over time. I think we're all probably facing scenarios in which acquiring more customers there's just constraints on that. It's challenging. And so there's two different paths to growing revenue. You either grow your revenue with your existing customers or you acquire new customers. And so we're also just looking at, are our existing customers finding value in our solutions? Are they adopting more of our platform as they get more value out of the solutions that they are using?
I'm blown away by the amount of metrics you're tracking, Leah. That is a lot of granular insight and intelligence that I think most of us don't have, right? So I want to maybe touch upon two things. I liked what you said. A couple of things, the points you made, Leah, was around the burden of tracking things. And then you also talked about alignment with other stakeholders, right, who are responsible for these numbers. I want to give everyone who's attending a couple of examples which will bring it to life. Because there is so much burden to tracking, I've over the years I've tried many approaches, and I've decided that we're just going to use what is being tracked by the function that's actually ultimately responsible for that metric, versus trying to track our own, because we just simply don't have the analytics resources or the prioritization of the analytics team to do it. So let me give this sales example. In the sales example, obviously sales teams would be tracking revenue, pipeline by geo and things like that. In addition to that, the three sales metrics that I care about are win rate, deal size, and sales cycle. Those are like top of mind for me in terms of beyond revenue. So there's like layers. So layer one is revenue, leading indicator, pipeline, and below that, these three metrics: win rate, deal size, and sales cycle. And beyond these three, then it matters if you have a multi-product business, then it's attach rate. And if you have a highly competitive space where you're trying to win market, then share of market. So those are the sales sort of general metrics I would track. And typically these are tracked by either the sales team or the CI team or the analytics team anyway. So you're sort of latching on and seeing how you're influencing that. But to Leah's point about alignment, I've had a situation where by product measurement of pipeline and revenue was not a priority for sales, because it was a platform product or a platform where you're just selling the platform. It doesn't matter which product. But the product team and the PMM team care really about their products and how they're getting attached. So in that situation, we had to go all the way up to the C-suite and really try and get that alignment so that everybody's looking at it the same way. And ultimately, we decided we're not going to do product level tracking. And so even though we track it just to understand the leading indicator. It's not the top line. So I wanted to share those examples. But when you see a misalignment, it's good to go up and get that alignment.
Nice. I'm just gonna layer in a few things. Just we have some questions coming in, just to share from like a self-serve motion, kind of like what Leah was saying, at assembly side, just to help on some of this stuff. Like we look at signups, looking at activation, time to activation. You're looking at the upgrade, how long, how much, how fast. You're looking at like velocity type of metrics, who's coming in, where was the sales assist on those kind of things. So I say all that to say like they're different, right? But you're still looking at metrics. To Jeff's point, some of these are shared. Some of these are one and the same, right? I agree with Jeff here too, around just like, yeah, like we have the story, yeah, we have the product metrics, we got the customer stories, we've also got the market insights, and we're able to craft something together to hopefully help enable other teams and make sure that they're hitting their goals too. So it's also another way to kind of think about your own goals is like enabling others to hit theirs too. So this actually blends in perfectly. Probably our last question before we turn over to the audience here. They're already coming in with lots of good questions. Is like, what challenges do you encounter? We've mentioned a few, but like when you think about the challenges that you're encountering when tracking KPIs, there's a lot here. So challenges. I like the question around tracking. Tracking's already a challenge. You said the word tracking. You have fun with that one. I see some stuff around MQL coming in. I'm seeing stuff around accounts versus individuals. So there's a lot that can be tracked. Leah, I'm actually curious to get your thoughts on this one first. You've got kind of both sides, sales and PLG motions going. I would love to hear how Gusto's kind of approaching some of this.
Yeah, you bet. Okay, so I would say one thing that is so clear to everyone who works at Gusto is you need a single source of truth. Everyone needs to agree what is the metric definition and where are you going to go to measure said metric? Because we have, I mean, I will say, Pallavi, similar to what you said earlier, like we are really fortunate that we have access to quite a bit of data, and we've pushed over time to get this data into self-serve dashboards that make it lower lift for us to get. And so a lot of this data is much more accessible for us than it was 2 to 3 years ago. So I'm very grateful for that. And at the same time, when this stuff gets built, there are multiple data teams within Gusto. And when we are setting our fiscal year plan and we're aligning with our cross-functional teams about the OKRs that we want to hit and what we're going to be accountable to, it's so essential to align up front on what's the definition and what's the source of truth you're going to use for that, because that is like one of the biggest waste of time that we will have is like, well, this dashboard says this and this dashboard says this. What's right? Everyone go off and do your own investigation and waste a bunch of time doing it. So I would say that's a really big one. I would say the other thing that I think is quite key for us is just look at the historical data limitations. We're trying to stand up new things all the time for the first time. And so oftentimes there's not a great benchmark for things. And that's okay. I think it's okay to say going into this, we are putting our finger in the wind. We're not exactly sure how successful we're going to be at this. Our goal is not to hit a specific KPI for this. Rather, it's to establish what the benchmark expectation should be. So I think just aligning and level setting expectations when you're doing something new for the first time, getting everyone kind of comfortable that this is going to be squishy and we're just establishing the benchmark. Jeff, I'll pass it.
Yeah, sure,
Yeah.
sure. I guess I agree with everything you said. Like the single source of truth and agreement on what the metric is the most important thing. I can speak to maybe 2 specific like tracking challenges I've faced that might be interesting to folks. So we talked a bit about like product level pipeline and revenue. Like you have to have a uniquely sellable unit for it to even work. But say you do, I've set up like basically different demo forms and landing pages, and then also a field where the sales team can like input. They have to input the products that are at play in the deal to give you like visibility into it. And then you need to know which ones were actually closed when the deal was closed. And so it's a lot of work with your ops teams to get that set up. And as with that and like the win rates, anytime you're dealing with manually inputted data, it's inherently flawed, right? If you want to track win rates, it's, well, who was the competition in this deal? Was it even filled out? So I've worked not at Gusto, more companies in the 1 to 700 employee range. And so we start with like enforcing the fields and agreeing with sales that they can be enforced in the stage at which it needs to happen. And if there seems to be messy data, like sometimes the volume is like not so big that I can't just go like ping the sales leaders and be like, hey, there's like 100 deals here that are blank. Can you have your team fill this out? So sometimes just getting scrappy is what needs to be done.
Totally makes sense. I like everything you're saying there. I think I want to just let people know, like whoever's, there's so many questions. KPIs is such a hot topic. No matter what the size of, however resourceful the company is, and I worked at large companies, Cisco, Intuit, Twilio, tracking is hard everywhere. Let's just agree. It is not about the number of resources you have. You just need, I think, somebody or a group or top down, somebody who's driven and very passionate about making it happen. And if that's the case, it will come through. Like in the case of Leah, like you guys have done a phenomenal job. Like it's, hard to have that. At New Relic, for example, I would say our PLG tracking is pretty granular. And the reason it is because we spent week after week after week really unpacking, asking questions and discovering, hey, we need a metric for that. Let's go track it. Let's add it to the, and there was analytics team involved in building those dashboards, but it happened over a period of a year. That whole journey took about a year for us to really get to the dashboard that we're all happy with now. And, most situations will be like that. And most situations will be, how far do you need to go? Is it worth it? Will that metric tell you something worthwhile? Will you actually make a decision based on it, or is it just a vanity metric, right? And I'll give you an example of our launches. So for our product launches, we used to do a ton of tracking, a lot of metrics, an enormous amount of human toil of generating those metrics. And then I decided to streamline it to 3. So right now we measure 3 metrics for launches, and I'm probably going to expand it to a couple more after this, but maybe 5. So 3 to 5. So the 3 right now are the share of voice in the market, because most launches have a pretty solid communications aspect to it. The second is the organic traffic that's coming in, because you want to see if all that social PR, all that buzz you're creating is bringing in some traffic. And the third is users, so the signups. So is that actually generating actual product usage of whatever product you're launching? So those are sort of the 3 metrics we've aligned on. And this alignment actually helps us do pattern recognition, helps us see which launches worked well, which didn't, and we can see what did we do in those launches. So you can get the benchmarks over a period of time. And the 2 I'm thinking of expanding is sales awareness that there is a launch happening. and customer awareness that there was a product introduced in the market. There are some ways we're sort of debating and discussing how to track it. But JD, if I can break your path a little bit, can I ask Leah and Jeff, how are they thinking about customer awareness and sales awareness? How do they think about that, measuring customer awareness?
Yeah.
That's a good one.
Go for it.
I'm grappling with this problem right now, and I would love your thoughts.
I'm going off the cuff here. Like you're reminding me that I should probably think about these things more. But one thing we do is set trackers in Gong, if any of you use Gong, of like certain keywords related to different like products or launches. You can even set it of like, are people using the new pitch deck that we used? That's one thing to use to keep an eye on it and like watch those calls and just quantify it at a top level. As it relates to customers, I should focus on that more, but generally we focus on just kind of like open rate and reach of like the product update emails to make sure that they know, which we do monthly, to make sure they know what's coming.
Yeah,
That's a good one.
I think those are great. I'd say from the product standpoint, we'll use Amplitude to track our customers viewing a page in which they're learning about a particular feature or product and the value props and what it has for them. And then we get those also set up So oftentimes when we're talking about expansion products like Gusto, so you already use Gusto for payroll and you need to now start using a time tracking solution, or you need to offer benefits to your hardworking team. And so we often think about connecting those in-product views to what we call opportunities. And opportunities is basically like a lead, but for a product that is an upsell product for us. And so we'll all agree on as a cross-functional team, okay, when a customer lands on this page, it means that they are aware of the product and they're starting to consider whether they should adopt this at their company. And so we will then get that also pumped into a dashboard that everyone has access to, so they can see how many opportunities are coming from viewing this page, and where did those opportunities originate from? Did these come from people who were seeing in product messaging? Did these come from people who were seeing emails? And so that's also where that multi-touch comes in, because we're able to say, oh, okay, which percentage of these people had seen and opened an email? Which percentage of them were clicking through to an email? And so that allows us to understand, are customers aware of this particular product? On the sales side, I would say the primary way that we solve for that is the usage of the sales materials and tracking and seeing our sales teams. We use Seismic to track our sales enablement. And so are the sales teams going to the pages where they're discovering these? Are they utilizing the assets available to their disposal? And once again, like, I just think this can't be said enough, like making sure that your sales leads have aligned and agreed with you on like what does success look like for sales utilization of these assets. Because I love my sales partners out there. They're wonderful. And salespeople, you know what? One reason they're good at their job is they'll ask for the moon. They'll ask you to create 1,001 assets that each person on their team will use a single time, because it could be really consequential for that particular pitch. But it doesn't mean it's a great use of resources. And so how do you engage them and really think through what's going to be most impactful across the whole team and make sure that it's a shared goal to get there?
Yeah, we use a high spot similar to Seismic. I forgot that, like, track utilization. And as you said, it's always 10 things that get used a bunch and everything else never gets touched. And then attendance at trainings, and for really high end things, we'll build like work ramp modules to see if people completed it and had like a lightweight quiz that they answered correctly.
This is awesome. Thank you, Jerry, for letting me go
No.
off the relation here.
No, I mean, the audience is lighting up. So we've got 14 open questions. Now is your time to start upvoting some questions here. It looks like we've got, let's see, 14. Start upvoting. I'm just going to pick a few of these that I'm seeing that I already have some nice upvotes around this one. So this one was kind of mentioned around share of voice. So yeah, I think this will knock out two. This will knock out two questions. Nice. All right. Pallavi, you mentioned share of voice.
Yeah.
How? So we're getting the how portion of things.
Yeah.
How are you measuring this?
So for share of voice particularly, typically your PR agency will measure it, and they have tools to do this, share of voice tools. I don't think you have to do it, you don't want to do this manually. But generally in most companies where I've been, the PR firm already has the tools and they do the job of measuring it. And those tools are essentially measuring how many times, or the volume. They look at the entire volume of content in your space, and you will obviously want to give them some domains and spaces that you're participating in. And within that space and domain, your key competitors. And so based on your key competitors, they'll start seeing how much things or assets they're putting out there, whether it's PR, social. They'll track all that and say, if the end list is 100%, and then of that 100%, what is the volume of engagement or volume of content your key competitors that you've identified are putting out? And that's how they measure the share of voice. Anybody wants to add? Leah, Jeff, anything you want to add to that one?
I think we used to use Sprout Social as a way that we were trying to measure share of voice. But yeah, that's a great answer.
Yeah, we did this more at my last company, Mixpanel, and it was pretty similar to what you described, Pallavi. Like, I forget if the tool was Meltwater, Sprout, or Hootsuite, one of those. And then it was basically building up the TAM based on who the competitors are to define the market, and then what % of conversations are you mentioned in.
Cool. Leah, I'll kick this one over to you first. I'm gonna make it a two-part. So the question is this: how did you go about building your attribution model, and how did you get the alignment? On the second part, on the alignment, there's some other questions around how involved, and this is for the broader group, were you the one pushing for these metrics versus helping the team, flesh out some of the metrics? I'm hoping that making sense there too. It's like because there is this like push and pull, but it's also where you're starting from. So we'll start, Leah, with attribution model, and then go to the broader group here around getting the actual measurement and the KPIs in place, and how influential you were versus, there's a team in place and I'm giving feedback. So Leah, kick us off.
Yeah, great. Okay, so we had a big campaign that was going to go in the fall as part of our push to drive a lot of our expansion products. And so I was starting to think about, okay, what are we going to use for the KPIs? What is the measure of success? We know what our North Star is that we've aligned as like the company KR, but how are we going to know, like, what are the leading indicators that we're getting there? And how are we going to know specifically which of the channels is contributing most to this? Oftentimes I think a lot of us are in situations where there's a lot of different tactics that we can try. There's a lot of different channels that we can leverage. And it's not always exactly clear when we hit the metric or don't hit the metric, which were the most important channels and tactics to use, and which actually might have required 30% of our time, but contributed 2% to reaching the end goal. So we were quite interested in seeing tracking at a more granular level and making this pretty self-serve, making sure that this was not a huge burden on marketing to have to pull from 18 different dashboards to really get this bottoms-up view. And so I started with a very broad cross-functional group, and I just outlined, like, here's the problem, here's what we're trying to achieve, like, how might we get there? And ultimately, after a few rounds, what we identified is our growth team was interested in doing something quite similar. And so we ended up pairing with our expansion team, our growth team, and there was a data scientist that we worked with on the growth team to figure out how we would build a multi-touch attribution model, specifically oriented towards this product and this campaign that we were running. And the goal was, okay, this is going to be the first time that we're really doing this. Once we build this out, we're going to refine it over time. I think this kind of like harkens back to what Pallavi said around the crawl, walk, run. You're not going to do this overnight. This is going to be incremental, and you've got to figure out where you're going to start and what's the small piece that you can bite off to begin with, and then how do you grow it from there. So our goal was to build this out for a single product, figure out what's going well, what needs to be refined. And then once we feel like we've got the model down, how do we build out a multi-touch attribution model for the rest of our products? So that's the long answer. The short answer is we worked with our growth expansion team and our data scientists to build it. Okay, and on the second piece, on the alignment piece, that's incremental. You try to get as much alignment up front, but when you're doing net new things, there's going to be things that come at you that you didn't anticipate. You weren't sure, you just never done this before. And so it's hard to see around some of those corners when you've never done some of this before. And so manage what you can up front and be thoughtful about it up front to try to drive as much of that alignment up front, and just try to get everyone on the team to understand that this is incremental. We're going to learn things along the way. We've got to be flexible. We've got to be willing to learn as we go. Gusto is a fast-moving organization where things change quickly, and people that succeed there, people that thrive there, are people that know how to roll with the punches and figure out things as they go and get better together over time.
JD, do you know, attribution is probably the most fun in quotes conversation in marketing. Like, there's maybe two ways to go with it. One is within marketing, which I think Leah was hitting on, of like channels or products for teams that things get attributed to. And then there's do we attribute like leads and revenue to marketing or sales or partners or other sources? Which was the question getting at, or what would be most interesting for me to hit on?
Well, someone specifically asked, Jeff, how do you measure channel partners? So let's go that route.
Really?
You can go the for the second half.
So channel partners, I mean, at my current company called Gem, we have 3 lead sources in summary: marketing, sales, and then partners. Partners is a very like early new channel for us. For a partner to get credit, they have to be the source of the lead. So they have either, we're low on process, so they could forward it to someone over email and it's timestamped, or they fill out the form. And we know that like this lead came in before they engaged with us otherwise, to give them like the source attribution. As for everything else, like marketing versus sales, it's like, it's a long conversation on that. The gist of it is if marketing was the reason that they came in, we have a whole MQL model and all of that, although I'm trying to move away from it. Then it gets attributed to marketing. If it was sales outbounding that got them to request the demo in the meeting, then it goes to sales.
Cool. I'm okay with that answer. What about like at New Relic? I figured you guys probably have some strong channel partners over there. How do you think about measuring them?
Yeah. Let me actually touch upon a macro trend, maybe a decade ago, or maybe, 5, 6, 10 years ago. Typically, the way pipeline split happens is in 1/3. So sales brings in a 1/3 of the pipeline, channel partners bring in another 1/3, and marketing brings in another 1/3. And if you asked a CMO, they would say, I will commit to 33% or 35% of the pipeline, right? That's what I'll bring into the business. The trend has shifted since. And if you talk to most CMOs, they will say they've started owning all of the pipeline. And that includes sales, channel, partnerships, all those pipelines. So they're starting to own that number and have a single dashboard. And in a lot of companies, I'm seeing that even at New Relic, we have a single dashboard. And because marketing is driving, not just demand gen, direct demand gen tactics, field marketing, but also working with partners to drive those motions. And we're also influencing with field marketing. We'll be doing events for existing customers. So even new business or attached business is coming. So generally, marketing owns all of pipeline. And then I think it becomes less of a tug of war who brought in the number because there's one group that owns that number. So I think that friction goes away a little bit. And there's less confusion, like Leah, I think you said, like, what's the single source of truth, right? It's not multiple dashboards, it's one single dashboard, the same analytics team that's looking at both sales and marketing is looking at it. So it's not a marketing analytics team or a sales team, it's one team. And so I think some of that confusion goes away. So here at New Relic, we're doing the same thing. We have all tactics that are spread across both direct and channel sales. And we're tracking all that here. But to Jeff's point, the one thing, quota-wise, there will be channel sales who'll have quota, right? And that quota can be retired either by your direct team or your partner team, like if you have AWS or Microsoft retiring your quota. And so that, I think from channel point of view, tends to be tracked, but pipeline is more unified, if you will.
Cool. All right, we got time. I think maybe one or two more if we can be quick. So I like this one, Christina. Christina Buckley. Thank you for your question here. Ready? This is a long one. Stay with me. It's fine if you want to track how many people are clicking through to certain pages on your site, but still, how do you know if that was successful? Is there an industry standard? For example, open rate for a prospecting email is 15%. So if you come in at 10, then you know you have work to do. But I find that a lot of the metrics in PM are soft and not definitive. So we got someone, they get a little antagonistic today, and I like it. It's a little like a bee in the bonnet, if you will. So anyone want to tackle that?
I love bees. I love bonnets.
Yeah.
Why not? I love spicy questions. I'm originally from Mexico, so bring me the spice. Okay, so I would say this is part of establishing like what good looks like, because there's going to be such a variety across industries, such a variety across contexts. And so start with figuring out like what is going to be the benchmark for success, and do a couple of tests so you can kind of narrow in on what that benchmark for success is. And I would say you ultimately are trying to get to company revenue. And so it's about tracking the path to get there. So it's great if customers visit your site and they are spending a lot of time on that page, they're engaging with the content, but ultimately, are you able to tie those individual users with, did they sign up for the product? Did they pay for the product? Did they use the product? So that's what I would say is, what kind of tracking can you implement to say that, like, yes, all that work that you're doing at the very top of the funnel is ultimately leading to paying customers?
Can I add one thing to what Leah is saying? So when I was working at Intuit, Intuit, if you're those of you are familiar, doesn't actually have a sales team. It's a multi-billion-dollar business built on marketing-led growth and product-led growth. And so marketing directly is responsible for revenue, which is fascinating. So, so I worked there for about 4 years, and it's pretty much, because it's sold to SMBs, all the marketing is actually pretty much, I would say 99% digital. There's literally no events or field marketing or anything of that sort. So digital is acutely measurable, and there was all we did all day long was a ton of A/B tests, multivariate tests. So that is a great way for you to measure and track to see how, what you're changing on the website or what's happening in that motion, whether it's messaging, whether it's pricing, whether it's cart flow, whether it's SKUs, how you're laying out the page, the colors, the buttons, everything can be tested, provided you have enough volume, traffic volume. But that's a great way to know what is, what is working and what's not working. I would say just run an A/B test, and you can do it more easily probably in an SEM page, because you can spin up SEM pages faster than, say, a web page, oftentimes, or SEM ads can be spun up very, very easily up and down. So SEM is a good channel to test it and then apply it to your website.
I have 2 quick thoughts. One, I think there actually are benchmarks out there. So I've seen them. I think it might have been Conversion Excel. Don't quote me on that. And then I used to work at a company called Mixpanel, which does analytics, and we would post annual benchmarks on things like conversion rates and activation rates. I think they still do this, but check it out. The other is I've been in the similar situation of we don't have a benchmark. The most important thing is benchmarking against peer companies, like similar size, stage, revenue, and go-to-market motion. Sometimes what I'll do is just find people I know or that are in my team's network, reach out. What does this look like for you? And you get 3 to 5 data points, and you have something reasonable to go off of.
Can I add to what Jeff is saying for a second? I like the second approach you're saying, Jeff, is like just find out for yourself through network. Because when I've used the published benchmarks, they've never really panned out. It's just, I think the situation, the stage, the maturity of your product, the awareness, it's so different. Even for if you have the same industry, if you end up being that granular, even then, I've never found them to be really useful. So I really like what you're saying about the second one. Just go source it, right?
Yep.
Then you can get more specific. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that too. Pallavi, I love the answer that you gave on A/B testing, multivariate testing. How did we get 47 minutes into this and we haven't talked about testing yet? So thank you for that.
All right. Let's see here. I think, yeah, we got time for this one. All right. Starting off with another like hot take here. Is the MQL, i.e. an individual lead, dead? Our marketing team is moving away to measuring leads to looking at account level opportunities for like enterprise targeting, like a buying group, right? So how can PMM enable the marketing team to measure the effectiveness of this strategy? I'm throwing in and adding, should we be the person in the org enabling the marketing team to measure the effectiveness of the strategy? So, so they want to know, how can they help enable the marketing team? Should we be the one enabling the marketing team to measure the effectiveness? Is my question. All right. Throwing it out there. Who wants it?
I have pretty strong feelings on this one.
Yes.
The MQL is not dead, but it should be. And I say this as like a company that still uses it. There's a lot of really good articles about the why on this that I'd be happy to like send and forward after. But Forrester does really good work on like the revenue waterfall model and how things have changed. Like, long story short, the idea that there's like this handoff and like people only interact with marketing and then they only interact with sales just doesn't make any sense anymore. It should be defining your ICP, going after these together with sales and marketing, having different tactics, kind of like land, air, and ground attacks, right? And then you can measure the engagement with these accounts within the buyer group, right? That's the thing to look at, is like, what roles do you sell to? And are they particularly engaging with your content or sales emails and other things? So I think that's where it's going. The hardest part is just convincing like finance teams on this, because like for good reason, they have a model, right? They're like, we need this much revenue, and then we need this much pipeline to get there, and then it needs to come from these 3 to 5 sources. And then we want to hold people accountable. And so this model kind of breaks all of that. And so if your finance team is reasonable, which thank goodness mine is, like they're open-minded, you just have to come with a better way of like, how will this work to get to the end goal?
Love the hot take. Anybody have another spicy take, or maybe like a cold take? MQL is long live the MQL.
I think I kind of generally agree with Jeff. I will say I'll add one context. So if you talk to your CMOs, and how they're going to have board conversations, their board conversations are going to be focused on revenue and pipeline pretty much. If you go to the board and talk about MQLs, they'll walk you out the door. So, because it's not what ultimately is driving the business. So MQLs, though, MQLs, SQOs, SQAs, all these SQAs, so sales qualified, opportunities or acquisition, if you will, all those are just steps in the process in my mind. And absolutely, in my mind, they're not dead. They are absolutely valuable. It's just that you can't, like Jeff said, you can't just say be all end all MQL and you're done. That's like, washing your hands off the business, and that's not right. You just want to measure the whole thing and really march towards that revenue and pipeline number, which is what marketing is going to be held accountable for, and the business is going to be held accountable for. So as long as you see it with that viewpoint, then I think MQL is not dead. There you go. Controversy for you, Jenny.
I like it. Leah, any thoughts, or you staying out of this one?
I think you all have done a fabulous job covering it. And I know that there's more questions, so let's spread the love to the other questions.
Yeah. Quick sharing of the love from Allison to Jeff of why is the reaction function disabled in this webinar? Seriously, great answer, Jeff. Thank you. There you are, Allison, for a nice shout out.
We'll do a virtual reaction for you. There you go.
There we go. All right. We'll make this one the last question for everyone. We'll move kind of quickly through this one. I kind of like this one. So what metrics should we ensure product marketing does not own? Great. The contrarian question. I love it. All right. So what should we not own? Give you a few seconds, gather your thoughts. We'll go around the horn, 30 seconds to minute each one, and we'll send our lovely viewers on their way.
Can I say MQLs? But besides that, I'll just give a broader answer. Like anything that doesn't actually matter. The metrics drive behavior, and if you're obsessing over something that doesn't ultimately lead to what matters to the company, I've been there, I've done it. Like I'm at fault on this. Just like don't track it, because it's pointless.
I was going to go the same place, Jeff, where you were saying, and I was going to go back to the example of every product owner will care about their product metrics. But if the organization in this case, like the one I was talking about earlier, the platform product, they didn't care about which product gets attached as long as the overall platform revenue number grows. So if there's no top-down alignment, like everybody wants the same metric, then there'll be a group of people who care about it, but ultimately you have no influence or ability to change that number. And so you're just in your own bubble measuring and tracking it. So similar to what Jeff said, it has to be what the entire business and not just a pocket of business cares about.
Yeah, I love that. I would say product marketing, and this goes for the entire organization, no one should own a metric that you can't easily track. So if you're going to be gold on something, make it easy for the team to figure out if they're hitting their goal or not. And I think the other thing that I would say is you've got to kind of define what your model is going to be as a company. Either you're going to have a accountability to one team on a metric and there's no idea like shared accountability, or you have to align shared accountability with people who can move the metric together. And you got to like pick and choose which model you're going to want, because otherwise there's just, if you don't have shared accountability, you don't have shared metrics, there's just perverse incentives for the ways that certain teams will behave, because they're going to try to like maximize their metric, not necessarily to the detriment of another metric, but like they're just singularly focused on this one thing. And that's not what drives the business. And so I think ultimately having visibility and shared accountability for metrics is quite important.
100%, yeah.
I want to go deeper on that one, Leah, because then you start throwing in like performance metrics. I need to get promotions. I need to get my performance package. You're not getting my product in the right place. Now your impact. Ooh, I've been there.
No,
Okay.
it's tough. And it only works, and I'll say it only works in certain environments, right? It's like all this stuff is so contextual. You have to know whether this type of model is going to work for your company. Is this a company where people are rowing in the same direction and want to support each other's success? Or is that not the way that the company's been built? Because it works well for Gusto, because Gusto is a very mission-driven company where we're all here to support the success of small businesses. And so people want to do great work and they want to do the great work together. So for the most part, shared accountability, I think, works pretty well for us.
Nice. Oh, right. I'm gonna drop it right there. That's a good mic drop. Thank you, Leah. I'm sure Leah's hiring if this has inspired you to go work for a mission-driven company. I'm sure Jim, you got Jim, sorry, and then also New Relic. But thank you so much. Very engaging conversation. I know I learned a ton. Thank you all for joining as well, that were listening in. Great questions. I really appreciate the engagement. I'm going to turn it over to Alex to round us